Introduction. The Wager. In 1998, at a time when the modern science of consciousness was not even a decade old, two of its leading lights made a bet at a bar in Bremen late one night. Christoph Koch was an intense young German-American neuroscientist who had been in hot pursuit of the neural correlates of consciousness since the late 1980s. That's when he, as a 28-year-old postdoc at MIT, had teamed up with Francis Crick, one of the most revered scientists in the world. It was Crick who had, along with his colleagues, discovered the double helical structure of DNA, solving one of the deepest puzzles of biology: how traits get passed down from one generation to the next. The discovery earned Crick and his colleagues a Nobel Prize in 1962 and gave him the confidence to believe that consciousness, perhaps the greatest mystery in science, would yield to the power of the same reductive approach that had cracked the code of life. In Koch, Crick had found a brilliant and energetic collaborator. Born in the Midwest to German parents in 1956, Koch had a PhD in what is now called computational neuroscience from Germany's Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, and would soon join the faculty at Caltech. With Koch at his side, Crick set out to explain how it is that a particular piece of brain tissue generates the feeling of being alive, the sense of a self in possession of subjective experience. If not for Crick's willingness to spend his considerable intellectual capital on it, the scientific study of consciousness might still be an intellectual backwater, not to mention a suicidal career move for a young neuroscientist or philosopher. For a sense of the subject's standing at the time, consider this tart entry on consciousness in the International Dictionary of Psychology, first published in 1989. A fascinating but elusive phenomenon, it is impossible to specify what it is, what it does, or why it evolved. Nothing worth reading has been written on it. But by 1998, Crick and Koch had published important papers that linked various measures of brain activity, such as specific frequencies of brain waves, to aspects of consciousness. It seemed only a matter of time before this approach would identify the specific neurons responsible for subjective experience, a physical signature of consciousness in the brain. Not so fast, Koch's drinking partner had argued that night. David Chalmers, an Australian-born philosopher, 32 at the time, had made a splash 4 years earlier at a consciousness conference in Tucson, remarkably enough, the very first interdisciplinary conference devoted to the subject. Chalmers was an unknown postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis when he spotted a notice for the Tucson conference. He had written his dissertation on consciousness and thought maybe he could wangle an invitation to do a poster session outlining his approach. To his surprise, he was offered a speaking slot on the main stage. With his long, stringy hair and boxy black jacket, think David Byrne circa 1984, over a concert T-shirt, Chalmers looked more like a rock and roller than a respectable philosopher. Note: in accounts of the famous speech, people invariably recall Chalmers prancing around the stage like Mick Jagger in a leather jacket, exuding a rock star attitude. But the event is preserved on YouTube, where it is clear that the 28-year-old is too nervous to prance. Rather, he's gripping the lectern tightly the whole time. His notes were scribbled on transparencies shown via an overhead projector. End note. Before teeing up his own theories, he spent 10 or 20 minutes framing the larger question of how best to approach the subject of consciousness by proposing that it be divided into two types of problems. First, there were what he called the easy problems of consciousness, which included figuring out the workings of mental operations such as learning, memory, discrimination, and perception. Not all that easy, but at least we had a proven scientific method for approaching such behavioral and cognitive functions in terms of specific measures of brain activity. And then there was what he memorably called the hard problem of consciousness. The puzzle of why any of these mental operations are accompanied by any conscious experience whatsoever. He asked in a subsequent paper, why doesn't all this information processing go on in the dark, free of any inner feel?